My name's Kim. I live in Denmark, work for Statens Serum Institute. There's a picture of it here. And I'm about to present MicrobeSeq Denmark, which is our microbial surveillance system refresh that we're going through, just started this year. So a little bit of background. Denmark is a little bit different. This is a picture of the campus of SSI, and we are in charge of national surveillance of infectious diseases. When I first started working here, I didn't realize that it was fairly unique in Europe. I think 5 or so years after I started, I realized that having all your surveillance on one campus is not normal. So it was very, very helpful for us in being able to navigate things. You could definitely notice this during COVID when more of the silos were broken down. So we were able to reach out to the epidemiology department, walk a block to chat with them, or reach out to virology, which is another block away. This is true for all sectors of surveillance, including the vet side of things, and the ones that it's not 100% true for. For example, we have a Danish food authority which isn't on campus. We also have a foodborne group that interacts with them regularly. So the whole national surveillance is in one location. Outside of this, Denmark is a little bit different because it's a small country. It's only about 5 million people. With very high trust, it's very egalitarian. And high per capita spending on healthcare. So what's very helpful in that is it allows people like me to make an impact on healthcare changes that can be adopted across the entire country. All right, so I'll talk a little bit about data sharing with the regions as well. So Denmark is pictured here, broken into its 5 different regions. And they each have their own microbiology lab. The size of scope of these differ greatly from different regions, with some regions having multiple bioinformaticians, and before COVID, some of them had no bioinformaticians. So it wasn't until, and going through this, sequencing, especially at the large institutes, is becoming more common. So we need to ensure that the data generated by the other regional labs is brought into Statens Serum Institute for national surveillance. So these when we bring the samples in for national surveillance, we of course want to ensure that everything we get is of a certain decent quality so that we can do surveillance with them. And the regions hope to get information back from us, ideally within the context of national surveillance, so that they have information they can act on. Getting most of this done is not just a technical challenge, but a challenge of policy and getting people to agree on things, aka politics. With that said, I think there's a strong effort from all the regional labs in Denmark to get this project done, and we all see that we will have a solution by the time this project is complete. All right. So a little bit of background on our whole genome sequencing growth. I arrived in 2015 or so. Basically, there was a group that started doing sequencing as a solution for national surveillance. And they were like, hey, we get this data. We need some person with a background to actually take care of it. So at this point, we had a machine under the desk that ran the analysis and 2 bioinformaticians to help with that. We were growing out the number of samples and species that analysis would take care of. And it's also important to say that IT at our institute, since we're not a peer research institute, is Windows-based. So they weren't prepared for a Linux-based system that we needed. However, we were able to get an IT server, and this is mostly due to good luck. I found the one IT person that was really keen on creating a Linux system, and he and I managed to convince his boss that it wouldn't be that much work to take care of. So we got a small cluster managed by IT, and as this was going, you can see the number of samples continued to grow, as well as the data storage required for that. The plus of IT watching this was they would help with monitoring of the system, the backups, and all the stuff that at this time I had no idea about. So pre-COVID, the system continued to grow. We had more resources, more bioinformaticians, and a lot more data going through this. At this point, I also should say that that friendly IT person we had left his position. So now IT was getting more and more concerned, like, hey, we don't have many Linux people on staff. Are you sure this is going to be a big deal? And we're like, well, don't worry about it. So COVID hit, everything scaled in a very large number. So you can see that the bars on or the y-axis on the side, there's a very different scale for the COVID samples compared to the microbial. And the amount of processing we had was now issue for national surveillance, and it was a very high priority. IT was not really able to push too much more, but they were able to get the job done. That said, they were making it very clear, because we also had a transition of IT providers over the year, that they don't support high-performance compute, and we needed to figure out a new way to deal with this kind of system. All right? So this is the MicrobeSeq project, and basically, as a quick bit of background, timing was very fortunate for this because we were being kicked off of our existing system, and Denmark was one of the few European countries that didn't apply for COVID sequencing funds. So we were able to apply for a big chunk of money after the main waves had occurred and use this money to apply to our infrastructure for pathogen surveillance. Most notably, to build this infrastructure that we now need to make sure it can all be done. We're taking, of course, the lessons from COVID and modernizing our setup, as well as the lessons from IT, because we have to manage this setup. And the other main goal is to ensure there's a clear data flow between all the regional labs and Statens Serum Institute so that we can always have the full context of samples for national surveillance. In the process of doing this, a lot of stuff was done a little bit on the fly before, so we're also trying to take more of a compliance-based approach on things and making sure that's built into the system so that we can more easily state what access people have and what we're allowed to do with the data. In this, we're also modernizing pipelines. We haven't done that during the COVID time because we were quite busy, with a goal of making them more accessible to primarily the regions, but other external scientists, and pushing our developers to do more with GitHub and Conda. The platform we will use to track the samples will be based on IRIDA initially, and allow our users to do greater analysis through Galaxy. Lab protocols are also being modernized with a plan of making all of our surveillance protocols available on Protocol IO, and improve the visualizations for genomic epidemiology for example, through the use of MicroReact. We will attempt to connect this together by developing APIs through the system so that we are not doing direct connections, but doing things in a more modern way with that. And the pipelines that we use for each species surveillance will be described in our repositories so that our regions or others can pull them down and be able to use them for further analysis. We hope by having all the national surveillance processed in the same way with open tools, we can encourage national standards on the samples for surveillance, and we'll be using the same tool set for all of our own samples. So by using the tool set that we do, we will say to the regions, hey, we're going to process your samples this way. If you would also like to use these tools, we have expertise in this now. You can try to do your surveillance through the same sets of tools. The expectation is this will give an opportunity to remove some of the tech burden on the regional labs, especially those with limited bioinformatics staff, and that they can focus on less core tasks and more on stuff that is relative to their regional hospitals. Because that is where they are can best utilize their contextual knowledge. So the picture here is really describing the intended flow of samples and how they're being processed for national surveillance. And I think if we achieve the goals of this project, Denmark will have an integrated microbial national surveillance system used by all the regions. And while that might not sound like much, I think that would be a fairly unique proposition because I don't think any country manages to do that globally. All right, so of course, this is a giant project, and it spans across the whole institute, the regional labs. It, of course, has a lot of challenges. What's listed here on the slide are what I, as a technical person, have to manage when designing the data infrastructure. This information has been gathered through experience and exposure, either through personal experience, reaching out to the broader community, or personal research. It is challenging to be even sure that I have a good grasp on all of these things, and maybe I don't even have that now. There's always so many unknowns, but I have to act on the knowns and try my best to reference others for additional information. So if this is challenging for me, someone with now almost a decade of public health experience, I imagine it can be very challenging for others that do not have that background. I would say the government public health is still very new to integrating technology into the public health side. So many people in government public health do not have a strong tech background or are aware of the different tools that they could utilize to make better systems. It's also hard to communicate this with all the stakeholders, especially when requirements are tweaked. I believe having this kind of long-term knowledge within the institute and not consulting it out is very important. The IT systems will need some flexibility, but we expect it to match legal guidance. So I see I'm out of time, so I'll just go a little quicker. So given these challenges, I'm still very optimistic that we'll be able to get this project done. So just on some quick future perspectives, beyond the changes of what's making the system, we're doing a big effort internally to change how we approach the problem. So I'm looking at things more from a tech perspective. Before this, most pipelines were made by a single individual. Now they're done by a group, or hopefully will be done by a group, which also means using tools like GitHub to get things there. We're doing more of our infrastructure as code and trying to use more of the tools that are already out there and not developing what we need internally. And for me, it's been very important to find other communities to know what is out there, what's relevant, and what's not relevant. So the takeaway here, though, is you're not Denmark. You know, situations are all unique. It can be challenging when you're a small group, perhaps the size of one person. But I think thinking of your data infrastructure in a larger picture can be very helpful. I started at SSI without knowing any of the broader community and would just go at it with the internal knowledge we had. But reaching out to local, regional, and national organizations really helped give me a better picture on how to approach things. All right. And a quick thanks primarily to the regional hospitals and labs that are the core of making this project work, the people involved, and the EU funding we've had. And with that, thanks for your time.